Well, a new report says China is in high-level talks to open a military training facility in Cuba. The Wall Street Journal says the base is at an advanced level but not yet finished. The move raises the prospects of Beijing having a permanent military presence around 100 miles from both the United States and Taiwan. And joining us now is Jekeliek, senior editor with the Epoch Times and host of the show American Thought Leaders. Jan, great to be with you today. A lot to talk about, but first I want to talk about this reported joint military training facility between China and Cuba. It's not a done deal just yet, but if it were to come to fruition, it would be located on Cuba, and as we mentioned, less than 100 miles away from the U.S. What do you think this all signals?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all, Tracy. The thing that's really important to know is that we've already known for some time that there is a Chinese listening post in Cuba. So it's kind of not surprising that they would try to escalate this. I mean, both on the Cuban and the Chinese Communist Party side, you might be familiar with the Chinese regime's Belt and Road Initiative, huge encroachment into over 100 countries around the world, big seaports being built and so forth. So you could actually view it in a sense as a building on that. But at the same time, communist regimes actually, basically intend to support each other. Cuba, was very instrumental in what happened in Venezuela. It's not surprising that they're trying to kind of pick up a bargaining chip for themselves working with China, as you can see, because Secretary Blinken was recently in China, and the U.S. is trying to, at least by everything that's been said, trying to kind of thaw relations to some degree.
Yeah, and I want to jump off of that, Jan. As you mentioned, America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, he did meet with Xi Jinping the other day in an effort to stabilize relations between the U.S. and China. And during that meeting, President Xi told Secretary Blinken, quote, "China respects U.S. interests and does not seek to challenge or displace the United States." Your thoughts on that, especially in light of this potential military training facility, I mean, really right at our doorstep?
That is, frankly, I would just call it silly, because it's a central kind of thesis of both Chinese foreign policy and military doctrine is displacing the United States. So, this is something, I'm thinking back to something Secretary Pompeo, back when he was Secretary of State, said. He formulated an approach. This was rhetoric, but I think it's valuable. Distrust but verify. So this is one of these situations where a statement like this needs to be checked that way.
Yeah, and on a different note, it seems that more and more evidence is pointing to the COVID lab leak theory. In fact, a recent report reveals that multiple government sources say, some of the very first people to contract COVID-19 were researchers at that Wuhan lab. Jan, are you at all surprised about this? And what more do you know about that?
Well, so I'm not surprised, because we did a documentary about this in April of 2020. The revelation that's new here is, in fact, that one of these researchers considered to be patient zero, potentially Ben Hu, that he was actually getting grant money from USAID and NIAID. That's the new information here.
And speaking of documentary, I know you personally have a new documentary out. It's about the COVID vaccines. What can you tell us about that?
Well, so it's the Unseen Crisis. Unseencrisis.com is the place to watch it. But to make a long story short, there have been quite a few adverse reactions to these COVID genetic vaccines. And the people who have had these reactions are seeking help. Some of them were even part of the official trials. But the moment that they go out and seek this help, they basically get kind of, hidden from the world. No one is responding, and with a very few exceptions. So we document some of these stories, including the very rare few people who did get some help, but most of them, very, very difficult reality.
Jan, and before I let you go, we have probably 30 seconds left or so. Curious what else you're following.
Oh, my goodness. Many areas. I mean, the one big issue right now is this understanding of what you might call the gender industry. There is this huge, basically, financial incentive. This is something that we've been discovering through some of my research, some of the recent people I've had on the American Thought Leaders show, is that there's actually huge money kind of behind this push for so-called gender-affirming care, which we have learned from recent testimony in Congress. 7 countries in Europe that have tried this have actually pulled back on it because the science says, no, this is actually not the way. This actually causes a lot more problems than it helps.
Yeah, and we've been following that as well. Jan, thank you so much for coming on and for your insights. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.